Hello students, welcome to BBA 204 Principles of Management. Today I will be talking about why ethics is important for managers and identify recent events that call for a renewed commitment to ethical management. Again, this is chapter 5 covering business ethics and social responsibility. So we will talk about the factors that shape managers' ethical decision making, including levels of moral development. So we will also identify important stakeholders for an organization and discuss how managers balance the interest of various stakeholders. So the key issue here is to ask and be able to examine the answer to this question. Will you be an ethical manager? So it is always argued that ethics is good for business, and therefore it is important that managers encourage their staff to recognize and to implement companies' ethical priorities. So many managers, unfortunately, in the real world commit unethical or illegal behavior simply because they don't have the courage to stand up and do the right thing. So the key question is, will you have the right thing? Will you have the courage to do the right thing for yourself and for the benefit of the organization? Ethics is mainly the code of moral principles and the values that govern the behaviors of a person or group of people with respect to what is right or what is wrong. So basically, ethics sets the standards as to what is good or bad in conduct and decision making. So in ethics, basically, we're dealing with internal values that are basically part of our corporate culture and shape the decisions concerning social responsibility with respect to external environment. So basically, human behavior falls into three categories: codified law, which is a domain of the courts. These are the values and standards that are written into the legal system and therefore enforceable in the courts. Okay? For instance, a typical example for the domain of codified law or the legal standard would be something like when the lawmakers rule that people and corporations must behave in certain way, such as obtaining licenses for cars or paying their taxes. Free choice, on the other hand, is a personal standard, right? It pertains to the behavior about which law has no say and for which an individual or an organization enjoys complete freedom. That is the domain of personal choice, the free choice. We set our own standards in guiding our own behavior. Whereas ethics here, it lies between the domain of the codified law and the free choice. It has, obviously, ethics has no specific laws, but it has common standards, standards of conduct and behavior that are based on shared principles and values about moral conduct that guide an individual or a company. Because the ethical standards are not codified, disagreements and dilemmas often occur about the proper behavior. So there's a fine line between, as you can see, unethical and being illegal. Illegal is something that starts with felony and all other criminal behavior that comes afterwards. Like stealing is illegal. Bullying in the workplace is illegal. Sexual harassment is illegal. Insider trading is illegal. So illegal is basically unlawful, illegitimate, illicit, criminal. Can all describe actions that are not in accordance with the law. Right? Illegal, unlawful, illegitimate, criminal. So these are the actions that are not in accord with the law. So unlawful means not sanctioned by or according to law, an unlawful claim to the inheritance, to take unlawful advantage of the trading situation. Okay? Ethical lapses during the last decade have been pervasive. Corporations and people have become associated with greed, deceit, irresponsibility, and lack of moral conscience. So managers carry an extreme responsibility, therefore, as a result, for setting the ethical climate in an organization and can act as role model for others. So as we can see, ethical crises involving illegal actions have brought ethical management to the forefront. For instance, we have faced ethical crisis leadership, especially during COVID-19. So we can see the situations where the businesses have worldwide suffered from a trust crisis. According to the Gallup poll, these types of crises have becoming more and more pervasive each year due to the illegal acts being committed by different sectors and managers in those sectors. Okay. Here are some examples of unethical and illegal behavior in an organization. Like, for instance, the illegal behavior, unethical and illegal behavior can be towards an employee. It can be towards the customers, such as false or deceptive sales, right? Or submitting misleading invoices. It can be towards the employee, such as discrimination against the employees, or creating a hostile work environment, or violating the health and safety standards. Again, the illegal behavior, don't forget, these are both illegal and unethical behavior. This type of behavior is not only unethical, but it's also illegal, right? So these types of behavior can be committed towards the suppliers, such as violating the contract terms or paying without accurate records or invoices, right? It can be towards the society, such as violating the public good, violating the environmental standards, exposing public or safety risks, right? Exposing public to the safety risks. It can be towards the creditors, meaning the financiers of the company, such as falsifying the financial records or breaching database controls or using confidential information. So here, so the moral behavior produces the greatest good for the greatest number, right? So in this case, the decision maker in the utilitarian approach is always expected to consider the effect of each decision alternative on all parties and select the one that will optimize satisfaction for the greatest number of people. Okay, so we're looking at the benefits and costs to all stakeholders in the organization. Okay, so basically, in what areas of business do we often find or use the utilitarian approach? I mean, when we're talking about the quality of the workplace, the health and safety standards, emphasis on efficiency and productivity, whistleblowing, right? So those are the kind of approach, we most of the time use the utilitarian approach because we believe that that type of approach will benefit the greatest good. Okay, so in other words, we're displaying utilitarian behavior in the workplace when we're taking actions to ensure that the office itself is a positive environment for your co-workers to be in, and then make it so for yourself. Okay? The second approach is the individualism approach. The individualism approach argues that acts are moral if they promote the individual's long-term interest. So this is exactly the opposite of the utilitarian approach, right? So in the utilitarian approach, we're talking about the greatest good for the greatest number. Whereas in this case, we think that if everyone makes decisions based on self-interest, everyone will benefit, which is why some business owners favor this approach, right? So as a result, individualism is believed to lead to honesty and integrity because that works best in the long run. But the problem here is with the individualism approach, we really don't know what is in the best self-interest of the individual. So we assume that individual knows what is in her or his self-interest. This is sometimes misinterpreted, right? This individualism approach is sometimes misinterpreted to support immediate self-gain and being selfish. So this type of approach, individualism approach, is not really popular and it's not widely used. It's not widely used at all in the highly organized and group-oriented society of today. Particularly, it is not widely used in a business organization. Whereas in the case of the moral rights approach, we believe that human beings have fundamental rights and liberties that cannot be taken away, by an individual's decision in the workplace. So an ethically correct decision is the one that best maintains the rights of those people affected by it, right? So in other words, to make ethical decisions, managers need to avoid interfering with the fundamental rights of others, such as, here we're talking about a number of criteria, such as the right to privacy, the right of free consent, the right to freedom of speech, the right to private property. So the moral right in this case is the right to be recognized for an intellectual property, for instance, that you have created. Intellectual property and the trademarks that we create, we have the right to be recognized, to be given credit for the intellectual property that we create. Like, for instance, think about a photographer, right? The photographer takes a photo, and simply because it is on the internet, someone grabs the photo and uses it without any recognition of the creator of that photo. So if somebody does that, basically that person is violating the moral rights approach to ethical decision making. Okay. And then we have the justice approach, which is kind of similar to the moral rights approach, but in the justice approach, we're also taking a step further by arguing that the moral decisions must be based on standards of equity, fairness, impartiality. Okay, so there are three important reasons for why we think the justice approach is somewhat superior to the prior approaches. Because we think that the moral decisions must be based on standards of equity, fairness, and impartiality. And then we have like three subfields under the justice approach: the distributive justice, procedural justice, and then compensatory justice. In the case of distributive justice, we require that different treatment of people should not be based on arbitrary characteristics. Let's say man and woman should not receive different salaries if they are performing the same job, if they have same years of experience, if they are both equally qualified. However, people who differ in a substantive way can be treated differently. Let's say that one person has a high school degree and the other person has a college degree. Which one do we prefer for that particular position? We prefer the one with the college degree. Therefore, so those people differ in substantive ways, and therefore they should be treated differently. Procedural justice, on the other hand, requires that rules be conducted and administered fairly. Right? Rules be administered fairly. So rules should be clearly stated and be consistently and impartially enforced. For instance, managers should be impartial in their decisions when they are promoting people to a higher position. Right? They should not be favoring their friends, they should not be favoring their relatives, they should not be favoring somebody because that person graduated from the same school as the manager's school. Right? So you need to be impartial in your decisions. And the third one is the compensatory justice, which argues that party responsible should compensate individuals for the cost of their injuries. In other words, individuals should not be held responsible for matters over which they have no control. Okay? They should not be responsible for matters which they have no control. For instance, if a company needs to lay off the workers over situations that they have no control, they need to pay compensation. They need to compensate the worker for the loss, especially over the situations that they have no control. Okay? In the case of the last approach is the practical approach, which sort of sidesteps all the debates that we have talked about. Because it sidesteps debates about what is right, wrong, or just, or fair, unfair, and it bases decisions on the prevailing standards of the profession and the larger society, taking the interest of all stakeholders into account. So it's basing decisions on the prevailing standards, whatever those standards are at that particular point in time. Okay? So practical approach, if there's an ad hoc problem that needs to be solved, then we use the practical approach. Like we use this practical approach in the management of COVID-19. So it was an ad hoc problem that we were facing, right? Immediate problem that we were facing that needed immediate solutions using the prevailing standards at that time, right? We invented the mask wearing. We required it at that particular point in time, even though it's no longer required at this point. But at that time, it was required for the good of the society, for the greatest good of the society, right? Mask wearing. So we use the practical approach, or we suddenly invented the 6 feet rule, right? We invented the 6 feet rule in order to control the spread of the virus. So that was based on the prevailing standards at the time, which no longer may be available, those standards anymore, or because those conditions are no longer available. But as the conditions evolve and as the conditions change, we no longer use the practical approach. Then there are a lot of factors that affect the manager's ethics choices, right? Because individuals bring their own personality traits to the organizations. Personal needs, family influence, religious background shape the individuals, right? Personality characteristics such as ego, confidence, independence may enable managers to make ethical or unethical choices in their decisions. So what really comes with ethical choices is the ability of the managers to act in socially responsible ways. So social responsibility, or the CSR corporate social responsibility is all about distinguishing the right from the good, from the wrong, right? It's about good corporate citizenship. It's about making choices that contribute to society and the larger stakeholders, right? So here CSR is really management's obligations or the company's obligations to make choices and take actions that will contribute to the welfare and the interests of society as well as the organization. So organization is trying to find the right balance between the organization's objectives and the welfare of the society. Social responsibility indeed can be a difficult concept to grasp because people have different beliefs as to which actions improve the society's welfare. So basically, there are a wide range of issues that can be quite ambiguous and that can be quite debatable with regard to what is right and what is wrong. So here are the stakeholders, right? Here are the stakeholders that affect an organization's performance, right? Here is a stakeholder, as you can see, each individual stakeholder is any group within or outside the organization that has a stake in the organization's performance. Therefore, each stakeholder, as you can see, GAP has to have communication with a number of stakeholders that are somehow related to or they have a stake in GAP's performance. Each stakeholder has a different criterion of responsiveness because it has a different interest in the organization, right? The customers have a different interest in GAP. Communities, whereas the creditors and the trade unions have entirely different interests, right? Environmental responsibility, for instance, has become a primary issue as both business and the public acknowledge the damage that has been done to our natural environment. So the companies are taking action that are less and less harmful to the environment. Another important stakeholder is the government and the overall community. We're here, the government regulations, we're talking about the government regulations affecting businesses, right? The taxation affects the business. So government has a different kind of interest in the business because government aims to collect revenue via taxation of businesses. So government's interest is the revenue, whereas the customer's interest is to buy high or good quality of products at the cheapest prices available. So therefore, you see the government interest and the customer's interest are two different types of interests. So what should the organization do to reconcile the interests of different stakeholders? Again, the green movement, as we have seen here, it has become an imperative, a new business imperative, driven by shifting social attitudes, new governmental policies, climate changes, and the information technology that quickly spreads news of a corporation's negative impact on the environment. Now, many corporations are now embracing an idea called sustainability or sustainable development. So, which is basically an economic development that generates wealth and also meets the needs of the current generation while saving the environment so future generations can meet their needs as well. And we also, as part of the ethics of sustainability, we have used the triple bottom line perspective. The triple bottom line perspective to measuring organizational performance by looking at three types of performances, right? So this is sometimes, these trees are sometimes called people, planet, and profit. People, planet, and profit, which can also be translated into number one, social performance, number two, environmental performance, and number three, financial performance. Okay. In the case of people, under people, meaning the social performance, we are really looking at the company's socially responsible policies, including fair labor practices, diversity, supplier relations, treatment of the employees, and contribution to community. Under the second aspect, which is planet, right, which is about the environmental performance of the company, we're really talking about aspects such as the organization's commitment to environmental sustainability. In the third one, the profit, which is all about the financial performance, we're looking at the organization's success in making sustainable profits, which is all about improving the financial bottom line of the company. So this is the triple bottom line approach, right? Don't forget, the triple bottom line approach, we're really talking about people, planet, and the profit, meaning social performance, environmental performance, financial performance. Here is the criteria for the social performance here. The first component in the triple bottom line approach, right? Right, and then there are like different types of responsibilities here. The economic responsibility, which is the bottom criterion. So the criteria of the corporate social performance involve four different types. At the bottom, we have the economic responsibility, right? At the bottom. The bottom criterion of social responsibility is economic responsibility. Because the business institution is basically the economic unit in society. Therefore, its responsibility is to produce the goods and services that the society wants, and also to maximize profits for its owners and the shareholders, right? And then the second one, the second approach, the second component of the social performance is the legal responsibility. So this is all about what the society deems important with respect to appropriate corporate behavior. So in this case, businesses are expected to obey the law, fulfill their economic objectives within the law, such as paying their taxes, right? So legal requirements are imposed by local governments, the state legislators, and the federal regulatory agencies. And then in the third aspect, third category, we have the ethical responsibility, which involves the behaviors that are not necessarily codified into law and may not necessarily serve the firm's best economic interest. As I said, this is within the domain of ethics. We discussed this before in the previous slides, right? So this has nothing to do with the codified law. This has something to do with doing the right thing, being ethical, treating people fairly. But to be ethical, right, the decision makers must act with equity, fairness, and impartiality, and respect the right of individuals, and treat individuals only when relevant to the organization's goals. So unethical behavior occurs when decisions enable an individual or company to gain at the expense of people or society as a whole. But as we discussed before, there's a fine line between unethical and illegal behavior, because not every unethical behavior is necessarily illegal. Okay? And then we have the discretionary responsibility. The discretionary responsibility is basically the voluntary, and it's totally voluntary, don't forget. right? And it is guided by a company's desire to make social contributions, not mandated by economics, law, or ethics. So this is really the highest domain of the corporate social performance, because it's discretionary. Discretionary responsibility is totally voluntary. So discretionary activities include philanthropic contributions that offer no direct financial payback to the company and are not expected. So in this case, discretionary responsibility is the highest criterion of social responsibility. Don't forget, it is the highest criterion of social responsibility because it's our voluntary acceptance of making a social contribution to the society, not necessarily mandated by law or economics or ethics. So again, building an ethical organization requires ethical leadership, requires code of ethics, right? Requires ethics committees to be established to make sure that the company is not violating the code of ethics of the company. Ethics training, supports for whistleblowers, right? There has to be a code of ethics written as a formal statement of the company's values concerning ethics and social issues. So this kind of communicates to the employees what the company stands for in terms of ethics. Okay? There are ethical structures, which are the various systems, positions, and programs a company can undertake to implement ethical behavior. There is also the ethics committee, right, which is a group of executives appointed to oversee the organization ethics by ruling on questionable issues and taking disciplinary action against the violators. And then we have the whistleblowing. Whistleblowing is the disclosure by an employee of illegal, immoral, or illegitimate practices by the organization. So, as you can clearly see, nowadays there's more and more support for employees who are whistleblowing illegal acts within their organization. They have instituted innovative programs and confidential hotlines to encourage and support internal whistleblowing. Overall, we have argued in this chapter that ethics and social responsibility are important business issues. So numerous studies have indeed found a positive connection or a relationship between ethics and socially responsible behavior and firms' financial performance. Again, social responsibility can be practiced and done in ways that also benefit the business in profitable ways. Again, we talk about how social responsibility also contributes to the bottom line of the firm and how integrity and trust are essential elements in sustaining successful and profitable business relationships. Thanks for listening to my lecture so far. Again, this was chapter 5, Business Ethics, and we discussed different criteria used in making ethical decision making. Have a good night, and I will see you in the next chapter. Bye-bye.